Today we're going to talk about the basics of placement part one. This is going to be a two-part module series, and this is going to be a really good way for you all to get a basic understanding of what placement is, what we use it for, and why it's important for our students here at UF. This can be very overwhelming, which is why we are doing it via module first. So then when you do come in for training next week, you will be able to see and ask questions and put this placement into practice. This will also be available for you to review and go back to on your Canvas. So today we're going to start with basics and why we use placement at University of Florida. So why do you think we need these exams with our students at UF? And there's a number of reasons that we do this. Everybody is coming in from different backgrounds, different schools, out of state, within the state. And this is really a way to even the playing field for all of our students and really make sure that they are ready and prepared to start at a specific level at University of Florida. You always want to remind your students that this does not exist to question the quality of their high school programs or how intelligent or smart they are. It's just that at UF, we want to make sure all of our students are aware of where they need to be starting and where they're going to be successful. So kind of going off of this, we're going to talk about maybe some general feelings that your students are going to have about the placement exam. Some students won't care. They're going to be like, all right, this is fine. UF knows it. I'm going to do it. And they're going to take the placement exams. They should be taking most of these placement exams before preview so that you all have a better idea of where they need to start and how to frame their schedule from there. However, you will get some students that are annoyed or frustrated. They come in with older family members or friends at UF with a schedule already planned, and they have an idea of what they want to take, and their placement tests may be telling them differently. So really it's just having those conversations again of why these placement tests are so important and helping them figure out, how this works within their schedule and that they won't be behind and this really will fit just fine. And so some of them will be grateful. Some of them are really confused and they don't know where they should be beginning. They're really overwhelmed. And so this is a way for them to kind of have something tangible to show them, all right, this makes sense. This is what the test says. This is where I should start. Some of them are going to take the test and not think that it is true. They're not going to think that it is a surefire sign that they are going to be successful. So they may argue you, but the nice thing is it is the policy and you've got to follow that policy, and you will always have your troubleshooters here to talk with the students if you need us to. And just being able to have those conversations of why placement is in place, it usually really helps those students understand and move forward with their schedule. So the easiest way to define placement is to understand that it's designed to be an assessment of preparedness for courses specific to UF. This is one thing that students don't typically understand, is the specificness to University of Florida courses. The calculus class that they took in high school may be very different than the content that's going to be in the classes at UF. And so helping them understand that this is what placement is for is to make sure they can be successful in the classes here. It's also imperative to remember that placement is only ever a predictor of success, and it's not a guarantee. Just because a student places into Chemistry 1 doesn't mean they're going to be successful. Students have to put in the effort as well. So why do you think placement is only ever a predictor of success? Students have to put in that effort, right? They have to go to class. They have to actively participate and engage in class, and they have to study and do their homework. Even with placing into these courses, if they do not keep up with the work, they are not going to be successful in the class. And so placement is only ever a predictor of success for that reason. Placement also does not guarantee you an A in the course, and it also doesn't mean that the course is easy. A lot of students think, oh, I've got this score on my placement exam, this class is going to be a breeze. But that doesn't mean that. It means that the student is prepared to take the course, but the student also needs to be prepared to put in the work for that course. So the placement is going to be kind of something that you want to tell your students is a predictor of success, but they have to put in that effort to be successful. And this also kind of on the other side of it does not mean that a step down in placement means the course will be less work and easy. There are a lot of students that take a course lower level than they think they should be in. It ends up being just as much work because they still need to be putting that effort to get the grade that they want. So this is just some information, to share with your students about what placement means. So let's kind of jump into the different ways that we actually evaluate placement at UF and what you will be using during preview with your students. We have a few different placement exams. The big placement exam that you will see and what students should really have done before preview is the ALEX exam. The ALEX exam is used for our math and chemistry placement. We will be talking about our math placement today, and we will touch on our chemistry placement in the next placement basics module. We also use the SAT 2 exam for specific foreign language placement with our students, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, along with our WebCape and Spanish Placement Guide survey, which are specifically used for Spanish placement for our students. Other ways that we can use placement are their students' incoming credits. So this could be advanced placement work, IB work, ACE work, and dual enrollment work from other colleges and universities. All of this can be used to place students in the appropriate courses in their first semester. ACT, SAT scores can be used in specific cases for placement, and in regards to our conversation, it's going to be mostly used with English placement. High school background and relevant life experiences can also be used as placement, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we move forward. Like I said, with that being said, some placement is subjective, so depending on your background in it, that can have an impact. So let's talk about our placement topics today. So what are the 4 topic areas that require placement at UF? We talked about them just a minute ago in that previous slide, but the big ones that we use are English, for specifically ENC 1101, which is our first English-based composition course. We use it for foreign language, specifically for French, German, Latin, and Spanish. If your students want to be placed into another foreign language, we'll talk about that in a little bit on how your students can go about that. We also use placement for mathematics for the following courses: for MAC 1105, MAC 1140, MAC 1147, MAC 2233, and MAC 2311. So this is your pre-calculus or calculus series that you're going to be looking at with your students. And then for chemistry, we use it for our Chem 1, and that is both for our general chemistry 1 and our general chemistry 1 for engineers, as well as the labs. All 4 placement areas will not apply to every student you meet with. So don't feel like you will ever use all of these with your students. Sometimes you will not use any of these with your students. It's going to be very dependent on what that student needs, what they're bringing in, and what their focus and major are. So do you think placement exams at UF should supersede other forms of placement? So what do I mean by this? Do you think that these placement exams should overrule any scores coming in from dual enrollment, IB, ACE, AP, etc. type work? Sure, there could be an argument for that, right? Because the exact definition of placement for UF is that it is preparing you for the classes at UF. So if your score is lower than what your incoming credit is, it would make sense, right? That UF placement should supersede other forms of placement. But unfortunately, incoming credits supersede any university-specific placement exams. We are not going to take away any credits that your students are bringing in based on placement. We're going to give them those credits that they come in with. So let's break it down now specifically to English. So like I said before, we're using English placement when we're talking about the ENC 1101 course and what students need for that. So ENC 1101 is the principal elements of writing clearly, efficiently, and effectively. It also focuses on writing logical arguments, building research skills, and developing critical thinking through reading, writing, and discussion. This class is really your foundation for being successful in any future classes where you've got some strong writing intensity and things like that needed. So why do students need to take ENC 1101? Every student's going to need 6 hours of gen ed composition. And this course is a prerequisite for all other gen ed composition courses. So if a student needs to have placement or credit for this in order to move on and get their other 3 hours of composition credit. So when can a student not take ENC 1101 at UF? So placement comes in both ways of taking the class and not taking the class at UF. If a student already has credit for the class through dual enrollment or any type of credit by exam, the student cannot take 1101 again. They cannot repeat the class. They will not get credit for it. If a student has high enough high school verbal score on the ACT or SAT, all attempts counted, they also will not start in ENC 1101. And so you'll see this chart at the bottom, which is also located in the preview workbook. So you can always refer to that when working with students. This will show you the scores needed to either register for ENC 1101 or have that conversation with your students about registering for any other composition course that they might be interested in. And why this is therefore is because your students, if with these scores have already met that level and they've got the proficiency enough to move forward with a higher level English course. So if a student, based on placement, should be taking ENC 1101, do they have to take that their first term? No, not necessarily. And there's a couple reasons why they wouldn't do this. But to start with, we do recommend that a student take ENC 1101 sometime during the first year, in the fall if possible. But if a student isn't comfortable with that, they can definitely look at moving that to spring. But we do want to get that foundational course in that first year because we know that students will be writing in other courses. So we want to make sure they've got that strong foundation down before moving into other writing courses in the future. But there are times we would not recommend a student take ENC 1101 during Summer B or if they're not comfortable, or any other gen ed course. So if their ACT or SAT verbal score is a little bit lower, we wouldn't want them to take it in the Summer B term because it's much shorter. We don't want them to have the pressure of maintaining and learning those writing skills in such a short period of time. We would recommend that course then in the fall or spring for that student. If a student is worried about composition classes or writing skills, we would definitely not want to put that in a class with them for Summer B because that's going to be a lot on their plate with another class as well. Some students will come in with all 6 credits of their composition met, and so obviously we do not want to recommend them take ENC 1101 if they already have composition courses. And then finally, if the student is already taking a 6,000 word course in the summer, we don't want to be adding another composition or words course in there. That's a lot of writing for that short 6-week period, so we want to make sure we're not setting them up to not be successful in those courses. So does a student earn credit for ENC 1101 if the student has a high enough verbal score to place out of the class? We get this question a lot from advisors and students, and unfortunately, no. This is, remember, just a placement test. It just is placing you out of the class does not equal credit. It is just telling you which class you should start in order to earn your credits for your composition. The student will still need to take a gen ed composition class at UF if the student has not done so already. So remember, placement is just placing you in the appropriate area that you need to be in and letting you know which class you need to take. Are there any composition classes that aren't first year appropriate? And there are a list that students will ask you about. And so these are definitely courses that we see that students are asking about that we do not want students taking their first year, and they are not appropriate for their first year. So you've got a lot of the professional writing classes in different disciplines: health, medicine, law, professional business writing. And a lot of these courses are, yes, they're a little bit more advanced, but they're also going to be much more useful when that student is further along in their college career, because it really is helping them write for future careers or graduate programs. And so coming in and doing that your first semester, you're not going to have a lot of background to do that with. So these courses are not things that we would allow students to take in their first semester. They're going to be taking that usually after their first year. And again, we do not expect you to remember any of this stuff offhand. You just need to use that preview workbook, which will have a full list of freshman appropriate classes that you can refer to and also refer your students to when looking for options for composition classes. However, keep in mind, if your student does want to take this or needs one of these later, make sure you account for that in the amount of composition credits that they need. So composition and words. Will all writing courses count towards the gen ed composition requirement? So will all these words courses that students need to take also count as compositions? No. There are tons of writing courses out there in different departments and different colleges that will not count as composition, but they will count towards words. However, any student that takes a gen ed composition specific course will get 6,000 words. So all composition courses will be 6,000 words. But all words courses will not always be composition. And this can be confusing, and we can definitely talk about this more in person during the training if you have questions. Does a student have to take ENC 1102? A lot of students think that after they take 1101, they must take 1102 to fulfill that 6 credits of composition. But that is not the case unless it's required by a major. And there are specific majors that do require E&C 1102. But for the most part, students can take any other composition class to meet that that extra 3 credits of composition that they will need. However, some students will need to meet the state core composition requirement, and if they don't do that through 1101, 1102 can count towards that. So just keep in mind the courses that they'll still need to take with what they're bringing in. So now we're going to move on to placement in the foreign language realm. And so with that, foreign language placement is applicable to any student who wants to take a language at UF and has a previous background in that language. So that could be a language spoken at home with family. It could be high school courses that they've taken in that language. Any type of background that they have in that language can be used for their placement. These are some of the languages that we do offer at UF. However, this is not necessarily a comprehensive list, and they aren't always all offered in the fall semester of a specific year. So keep this in mind, but the idea behind this is that your students aren't stuck with specific languages that they feel that they have to take based on background. They are welcome to really open up and try out different types of languages and really explore kind of what languages are out there for their proficiencies if it's needed. So why do you need to know about foreign language placement, right? The obvious answer is students will take foreign language, and there's a lot of reasons why they're going to take foreign language. So some colleges require foreign language, right? So our college in liberal arts and sciences, for example, requires all students to take a foreign language. We have students that end up wanting just to take up foreign language for fun, for their own background. Others want to do a major or minor in foreign language. And so knowing where to start with that is really, really important. And then, of course, who doesn't want to learn a language? Language skills are indeed super sweet, and they are going to give students some really good tangible skills that they can really take into their future careers and really have something different that helps them stand out and really help in that job search. So does every student need to take a foreign language? Nope. No, students do not have to take a foreign language unless they are in a specific college, or certain majors will also require students to take a specific language. And we'll go into this a little in depth with this a little bit later about which colleges and majors do need that. Some colleges require students to meet proficiency in a foreign language. So there also might be an option to this where they could do more of a quantitative method if they didn't want to do the foreign language. But not all colleges or students will have to do this. It's just going to be specific majors, colleges, or students. So what does it mean to be proficient in a language? The easiest way to say this is that you can comprehend the introductory sequence of that specific language that you're trying to learn. That does not mean that you have to take a certain number of credits, although it's usually around 10 credits, but it also doesn't mean that you have to take a certain amount of classes, although it's often too. But this does not mean that you have to do that to meet proficiency. And this is where placement comes in. That background and what you know about that language already can impact what you're taking and how many credits and things like that. So when would a student take a foreign language in his or her first term? So students aren't necessarily going to take a foreign language to start out. They may take it a lot later. But there are times that we do want to encourage that foreign language in the first semester. And that a lot of times is if they want to pursue a major or minor in that language. If a student wants to pursue a major or minor, you definitely want to get them started on those language skills and those language courses early, because a lot of them are prereqs to each other, and it will take some sequencing to get them where they need to be. And we want to make sure they have enough time to do that. If a student really wants to build up their language skills to become fluent or proficient in a language just for their own personal growth, that is another reason that they'd want to take one their first semester. If they want to meet the foreign language proficiency requirement with a language that they studied in high school. So if a student just wants to start something new, they don't necessarily have to do that in their first semester to meet their proficiency. They can start that a little bit later. But if a student took German in high school, for example, and wants to continue in German here, it's probably smart that they want to start that now while it's still fresh in their brain. And if a student really likes studying languages, so that's going to be something, a lot of students will choose to pursue multiple languages. So getting them started early is a really important thing to do when they want to do these types of things in school. Do not discourage students from taking a language because it's a 5 credit class. We have a lot of people that worry about adding a 5 credit class to a student's first semester, but the languages are just something that should not be discouraged. You want to encourage your students to take these regardless of first semester or not. So how do incoming credits factor in? So students can actually meet their proficiency through accelerated mechanisms such as the AP, IB, ACE, CLEP, or dual enrollment. They can place out of it and be done with their foreign language if they just need to get the proficiency through those means. If a student wants to continue, they can take the next course in the sequence and continue moving forward. They also can repeat the last course that he or she earned credit for if they're concerned about the skill set, if they want to kind of have that refresher before continuing on. With these incoming credits, they do not have to take the SAT2 and they do not have to talk to the department unless they want that additional guidance. Remember, those incoming credits will supersede anything else. So those incoming credits are enough placement that you need to get them into that next course that they want. So typically an introductory sequence will most likely be an 1130 and 1131 sequence. A lot of the courses, a lot of the languages will be fall spring only. And most intro courses will be 5 credits each. It's okay to start higher than the intro sequences. So your student may have a stronger background and not want to start in the 1130 or 1131 sequence. They may look at 2000, 3000 level classes, and that may be okay for certain students. There is a language at UF that offers a 3-semester sequence, which is Latin, but they do now have a 2-semester sequence option as well. So just depending on your student's preference, they can do either one. But like we mentioned earlier, the most foreign language sequences for proficiency are going to be two semesters. So for talking specifically about Spanish, SPN 1130 is beginning Spanish 1. It is recommended for students with no to very little or 0 to 1 year Spanish background. Spanish 1131 is beginning Spanish 2. That's also 5 credits. And it's recommended for students with at least 2 years of Spanish background. And then the next one up from that is going to be Intermediate Spanish 1. This course is recommended for students who are bringing in incoming credits. So if a student is bringing in credit for 1131 or even 2200, they may want to repeat that class and start there if they want to continue in their sequence and continue. To meet proficiency in a language, students have to complete SPN 1131. So to do that, they will either take both 1130 and 1131, or if they have the background, they can just actually take the one class to meet proficiency in Spanish. So they just need the SPN 1131. So like we mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily have to take the 2-semester sequence. You just have to take it up through that proficiency level. Other Spanish sequencing, if students are moving forward, would be your Intermediate Spanish 1 that we just saw on the last slide. Moving on to 2201, which is Intermediate Spanish 2. And then continuing on through 2240 and 3300. If students are fluent in Spanish, refer them to the Spanish department after preview to discuss where they should be placed, because they do have courses for fluent Spanish speakers that the students can take. So let's talk about French. French is very similar to Spanish in the sense that the introductory course is FRE 1130. Beginning French 1, also recommended for students with 0 to 1 year French background or experience. FRE 1131 is beginning French 2, and it is also 5 credits. This is recommended for students who have taken FRE 1130 or the equivalent through dual enrollment. So they want to have typically students who already have credit for French 11. FRE 1134 is an accelerated French review. So this is a little bit different. So this is for students who have at least 1 year in French. They don't need to take a placement test, but they can take this combined French 1 and 2 course to meet their proficiency. And then finally, French 2220, Intermediate French 1, is 4 credits. And that is recommended for students with 3+ years in French. This will also apply to students who bring in incoming credit, just like the Spanish. So very similar, except there is an accelerated French review that students will take if they've got 1+ years of French under their belt. So to meet proficiency in French, it's the same way. You either need to take French 1130 and French 1131. If you are coming in with dual enrollment for French 1130, you will just take the 1131. And then if you were coming in with high school experience, you can take the 1134. Other French sequencing, very similar to Spanish as well, as you've got your intermediate French sequencing through 3300. If they're fluent in French, you will also refer them to the French department for placement or coursework where they need to be, what they need to be taking. Moving into German, so placement for German is a little bit different. So there are a couple options of courses students can actually take in German. You can meet proficiency through GER 1125 and GER 1126, or your kind of standard that we've seen before, the GER 1130 and 1131. So what's the difference with these courses? So GER 1130, much like the French and Spanish, is a book-based 2-semester sequence. This sequence is really going to be best for those students who want a traditional classroom setting and will learn and perform best in this type of setting. It typically meets 5 days a week, every day in class. Whereas your 1125 and 1126 sequence, this is called Discover German, it actually only meets 2 periods a week, and it's a hybrid, so part of the class will be online. It was developed by the German faculty at University of Florida. It's practices the same language skills as the traditional German sequence, but you need students that are going to be self-starters, disciplined enough to study on a daily basis without being in class every day. So they need to be comfortable working in that online learning environment. So that is there. It's the same type of concepts. You're still meeting that proficiency, but it's going to be that type of student and the type of learning environment they prefer in determining which class that they're going to take. So let's talk about the colleges that require these languages. So like I mentioned earlier, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, you must take a language to meet proficiency. And this can be through taking the courses here, incoming credit, testing out, whatever it may be. You still need to have this to graduate. The College of Journalism and Communications, you need to meet proficiency just as you would with College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, or they have an option to pursue a quantitative option where you're taking different types of courses in a quantitative nature to meet that requirement. The School of Construction Management has a specific Spanish class that they take. It's SPN 1180 or higher. Any questions on that, definitely refer your students to that school because they have specific requirements for their majors. And then College of the Arts, the Bachelor of Arts only, but they may need to be a specific language type depending on what their major is. So that is also something where those students will meet with the art advisors, so they will definitely get them advised on that as well.
Hi, preview staffers. Welcome back to math placement, or I guess this could be your first one. Who knows where you are in this sequence? I'm really excited about this PowerPoint. I found it, and I think it's the coolest thing ever. And I think it looks like we're in space. And I think that the font makes it look like, I don't know, it could be Star Wars or Star Trek or something equally awesome, Doctor Who-ish. I don't know, but it made me happy. And it's really late. My struggle is real, so if I'm a little weird, a little loopy, just kind of roll with it. I promise the information will be solid no matter what. Okay, so math placement, yay! So let's talk about math classes. I know we talked about this some this morning in class, but I do want to talk a little bit more about some of the other classes. But we're going to start at the very beginning, Mac 1105, which is basic college algebra. And then we're moving into Mac 1140, which is pre-calculus algebra. And it's really important to recognize that some students are going to come in and say they have dual enrollment for college algebra, but they're not going to necessarily distinguish between Mac 1105 and Mac 1140. And so they're going to try to tell you, no, I have Mac 1140 credit. Make sure that you are double checking with them which class they actually have, since that can obviously play a big part in what class they would take next in their sequencing, assuming they have to move forward with mathematics. So Mac 1114, which is trigonometry, which is the 2-credit class, and then Mac 1147, pre-calculus algebra and trig. Now, if you remember, and I'll go over this when we get to this slide, but if you remember, Mac 1147, which is pre-calculus algebra and trig, is a combination of Mac 1140, pre-calculus algebra, and Mac 1114, trigonometry. So it makes sense because obviously those words are all combined together in Mac 1147. And it is an accelerated course, obviously covering both of those topics in one term. So it is going to be something that some students are going to place into, and it's going to be appropriate. And then there's going to be other students who are going to want to follow the what we call broken down version of 1147, splitting algebra and trig into two separate semesters. Continuing on with our discussion of all of the math classes, we are jumping into Mac 2233, Survey of Calculus, or fondly known as Business Calc. Now, if a student has credit for Calc 1, so this is the other class, Mac 2311, if a student has credit for Calc 1, keep in mind that this will successfully fill in for 2233. Now, where we can see this happening is if a student, let's say, gets a passing score on their AP Calculus, but they're a business major, while the credit they get through the AP Calculus exam is Mac 2311, which is not the same thing as Mac 2233. Keep in mind that if you look at the prerequisites for these two calculus courses, Mac 2311 requires college algebra and trigonometry, right, so that students are successful in it, which implies that Calc 1, Mac 2311, is covering concepts of college algebra and trigonometry. Mac 2233 is only looking for Mac 1140 or college algebra as its prerequisite, which implies that it is covering the same material as 2311 minus the trigonometry. So if Mac 2311 then is covering both algebra and trig, it's an okay option to use to substitute for 2233 for any requirements. We'll go over this more in class. If it's confusing, I apologize, but I did want to kind of hit on that point that students are going to have to retake take 2233 if they have credit for a higher level math class that will substitute for the course in question. Now, I don't think we talked about this in class, but Mac 2311 also has engineering specific course content. So if a student, as opposed to in the chemistry where the student is taking potentially a completely different course code, Mac 2311 actually has housed within the overall class engineering specific sections. Now, they're all taught at the same time. I think it's Monday, that was really high. I think it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, fourth period. But don't quote me on that. I'll figure it out. We'll make sure that you guys know, but that's what it's been in the past. So any student who is in engineering and who happens to be taking Calc 1, so the students that are taking pre-calculus or starting in Calculus 2, this wouldn't apply to them, and that's fine. But any student who's taking Calc 1 who's engineering, declared engineering, they're going to have to take the engineering specific sections. Now, because this class is the same number, same prefix, same number as the non-engineering sections, it's obviously okay for students if they decide they don't want to do engineering, but they still want to use this calc towards their major, their new major. That's fine, not a big deal. Students can switch it around however they want to, but if they are in engineering, they are going to be required to register for that particular section or those particular sections when at preview. Now, one of the things that we see really commonly, that seems redundant, one of the things we see commonly at preview is that students will be registering, and this could happen in the registration lab with you, and all of a sudden they're trying to add Calc 1 and it's not letting them in, and they start to freak out because they have their ALEC score. Why isn't it letting them in? Life is so cruel and unfair and all that stuff. Now, before they, dissolve into like mass hysteria, please make sure to check the section and see if the student's trying to register for a non-engineering or an engineering section. It happens all the time where we have preview advisors and students coming in during day 2 advising saying, I can't register for Calc 1, what's going on? I have the prereqs, and they're just trying to add the wrong section. So engineering students are only allowed in engineering sections. They can't register for the other ones, and vice versa. Non-engineering students can't register for the engineering specific sections. It makes sense, but it causes some problems because, again, we're under the same course number, so it's not as easy as the Chem 2095, 2045 separate option. So moving on from Calculus 1 is Calculus 2, and then into Calculus 3. So Calculus 3, I want to hit on a little bit because you are going to probably hear from some students that while they might have credit for Calc 1 and Calc 2, they've been told that maybe Calc 3 isn't the right fit for them. Now, not everybody should take Calc 3 in the fall. Obviously, it depends on the student. But the College of Engineering, which requires Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3, and then also MAP 2302, which is differential equations, it requires all 4 of those math courses for any student who's pursuing a degree in engineering. So those 4 math classes are going to be very important for their tracking, for their understanding of the content in engineering, all of it. So we hear from students commonly who, let's say, have a 5 on their AP Calculus AB exam from junior year, and they're predicting a 5 on AP Calculus BC. So they're rocking the calculus. They know their math, which is impressive. And they're saying, well, I have credit for Calc 1 and 2. I want to go into Calc 3. Why is engineering saying that I shouldn't? Now, in the past, I've kind of been confused about this, but I have recently learned, and this is actually very helpful, I think, that the reason that the College of Engineering is very cautious about students going into Calculus 3 and strongly encourages them to retake Calc 2 is because it's not about the Calculus 3 that they're worried. It's because the Calculus 2 content is heavily needed to be successful in differential equations, MAP 2302, that students usually take after they take Calc 3. So what we find is that, or rather what I've been told is that the AP exam or class doesn't actually cover the full content of Calculus 2. It covers about 60% of the content of what MAC 2312 at UF would cover, which is enough for students to maybe get into Calculus 3 and, figure it out and do okay there. But because differential equations rely so heavily on Calc 2, that's why the College of Engineering is really very strict about encouraging students to register for Calculus 2 as opposed to moving into Calc 3 if they're bringing in those AP scores. So just, some things to think about. So math placement 2233 and 2311. So we talked about this in class, so I'm just going to briefly review it. So the business calc, we've got business majors, accounting, economics, sport management falling under that category, that sequence. And then the Calc 1 on the other side, we've got the science majors, we've got engineering, we've got the pre-health students for the most part, math and stats, and just to keep in mind what what majors are going to be following which sequences. So this should look very familiar. And just as a recap again, on the top there, we've got the survey of calculus sequence. So the MAC 1105 leading to 1140, leading to 2233, which is that business calc. And then we've got the 2 options there down below of how to get to 2311. So MAC 1105 leading to 1140 or 1114, then the other one, the other semester, into Calc 1. Or if a student has pre-calculus background and is placing into MAC 1147, they can start there, which then gives them the credit to be able, or the prereq to be able to move into Calc 1 as well. And then keep in mind MAC 1140 or 1114 can be taken in any order, but students tend to take MAC 1140 first before going into MAC 1114 in the following term. So just a quick recap. When we talk about math placement, we are talking about ALEKS. So just to kind of review, the ALEKS exam can be found on 1UF, and while a student hypothetically could take it at preview, we obviously discourage that from happening, as we talked about in class, because we want students to be focused on preview and their preview experience, and ALEKS can take a lot of time and focus, not a lot of time, but it can take focus, it should take focus, and therefore we want students to do it in an environment where it's not, they've hit their saturation point by, minute 17. So just encourage students, if they haven't taken ALEKS, to just take it at home if they need to, and hopefully a lot of students will have it coming in, and that will be that. When we talk about what ALEKS is required for, obviously we're talking about MAC 1105, MAC 1140, 1147, 2233, and 2311, all of which hopefully should look familiar because you just listened to the rest of this presentation.
Hey everyone, I'm going to cut in on the module just to update some changes to the required versus recommended. Now we have required scores when it comes towards ALEKS placement into MAC 1105, 1140, 1147, and MAC 2311. These are hard cutoffs. Now, of course, when we're talking about placement, we got to take into account incoming credit. and whether that's going to meet the prerequisite for the course. But in terms of just looking at the ALEX, these are hard cutoffs, which means these are required scores to be able to place into these courses. However, these are also recommendations based off of how a student performs on the ALEX exam. So if a student scores a 35 on the ALEX exam, we recommend taking MAC 1140. However, if a student did not score 35 on the ALEX exam, they would still need that score in order to be able to take that course or prerequisite credit of MAC 1105. And so even looking at the breakdown between MAC 2233 and MAC 2311, these are the ALEX scores that are required to register for each individual course. As Rachel mentioned earlier in the module, you can go down when appropriate. That doesn't always mean that the course is going to be easier. However, a student needs the appropriate score to place into the individual courses. So these will be hard cutoffs for this year, and also a reference point of what course we recommend based on how a student performed on the ALEX exam.
So this is just another way to look at it. We actually have this in the workbook. This is a direct print from that. And so you can see we really try to lay out very clearly based on the ALEX score on the left-hand side where the student should start and then what happens after that course-wise. And I think it's actually a really great way to look at it and kind of see it from a different perspective, all lined up with the actual scores. The big thing is remembering which students are going to look at which box, if you will, because some students are just going to immediately go to the first one, and that might not be appropriate if they are, let's say, a business major or an accounting major, and they really need to look at the box below because that's actually going to be the one that applies to the survey of calculus class that they need, and they don't actually have to look at the placement chart for calculus 1. Incoming credits. All right, so it's okay to use incoming credits to determine placement, right? It's definitely fine. We say incoming credits can supersede the placement exams. We talked about that in the English mini module. I can't talk. So it's okay for us to use incoming credits to help us figure out where the student's going to start. But remember, we cannot use predictions for MAC 1140, 1147, 2233, or 2311. The students actually have to have scores in ALEX, or their incoming credit has to actually be verified for us to be able to help them register for those classes. Anything higher than MAC 2311 is okay, and I know that was really weird for you guys earlier with our treacherous block, but again, that's just because the math department feels that students are not going to stay in Calc 2 if they don't have Calc 1, and that's a fair guess to go with. So when we talk about predictions and we talk about you can't use predictions for getting into Calc 1 and it's okay to use predictions for Calc 2, what we're talking about is unconfirmed scores or grades. So if a student is using their preview prep sheet as proof that they are able and eligible to register for a class because they have incoming credit, keep in mind that that's self-reported, which means it's a prediction. As much as I would love to trust every student that I've ever talked to, I know that some of them aren't always the most honest, or they could just be really confused. So if a student wants to confirm that they have the incoming credit and they can do that, they can obviously show you a score report if it's been received, either on their phone or pull it up on an iPad, laptop, whatever, or they can show you an unofficial copy of the transcript. It doesn't have to be officially in the system as long as we can see that it's a verified, legitimate copy. It's not like a Word doc. That would be a little weird. But something that we can verify, and that would be delightful. And then, of course, we're happy to give them input consent into the class that they're trying to get into that they then meet the prerequisite for. But the preview prep sheet is self-reported. Therefore, it is not a confirmed score or grade. And again, just a reminder, incoming credit does supersede ALEX. So even if a student, let's say, tests into MAC 1147, they have a below a 75%. If they're trying to get into Calc 1, if they have pre-calc through dual enrollment, they're able to then use that to enter into calculus. That is an acceptable way for them to take the class. So IB Math Studies is not an effective placement tool. Sometimes students will talk about, well, I have IB Math. math just isn't the strongest in terms of the IB test, the IB curriculum. The other pieces of the curriculum are great. I have nothing against the IB program at all. International Baccalaureate those are fun words to say, but the math studies is not an actual effective placement tool. And that's because students who take math studies are then earning credit if they do pass their exam in classes like MAT 10, I think like it's 1033 or MGF 1106. And that's fine. MGF 1106 will give you Gen Ed mathematics credit, which is great, but it's not necessarily going to be the best indicator of success or predictor of success for going into that pre-calculus realm. So that's really where ALEKS is going to be very important to encourage students to take, and they would have to take it anyways. But if they're arguing with you about their skills because of IB Math Studies, I would definitely say, hey, let's really use ALEKS to make sure we're setting you up for the best possible path to success. Keep in mind, and you may have noticed this when we've been going over all of the AP information, but there's an AP Calculus AB and AP Calculus BC. Those are two different exams. AB is like Calculus 1. A lot of times students will take it either their junior or senior year. If they take it their junior year, then what very commonly happens is they'll take AP Calculus BC, which is essentially Calc 2. So they're two separate courses, or two separate classes rather, two separate tests. So students might come in and have credit for Calculus 2 and Calculus 1, and that's going to probably be because they have their BC exam, though more often than not, you're going to see them have both. And keep in mind, earning credit for Calc 1 with a 3 on the AP Calc AB exam. So I took the AP Calc, kind of the Calc 1 class essentially through AP, and I got a 3, which is great. I got credit for Calc 1. That's awesome. But if I need to go on and take Calculus 2, it does not necessarily mean I'm prepared for it. Our data shows that students who go into Calculus 2 with a 3 on AP Calc, their scores are a little bit lower than the B in average. So it's not necessarily the best predictor of success. And so it's one of those things where if they have a 4 or a 5, then we actually see the average score, average GPA in that class jump up pretty fast. So a 3, not a bad thing, but we probably would recommend that they retake Calc 1 to make sure that foundation is solid at UF before moving into Calculus 2. And remember, what a student can do and what we recommend a student should do might be very different. They might be the same, but just in that example that I was just talking about with the calculus, a student has Calc 1 credit. They could take Calc 2, but we would probably recommend, if they earned a 3 on AP Calc, to probably retake Calc 1 first and make sure that that foundation is solid and there before they move into Calculus 2 at UF. And that's just, again, that's our recommendation. The student can do what they choose, but we want to make sure we're presenting all different options, all different recommendations so the student can then make the choice fully informed. So math placement, ALEKS. So these are going to be, the next couple of slides are going to just be general questions that you might hear or things that we want you to think about when you're working through math placement. So would you ever not recommend a student take the ALEKS exam? Well, I mean, sure. Obviously, some students aren't required to take pre-calc or calc. It has nothing to do with their degree. They might have gen ed mathematics, but they could do classes that are not in the pre-calc sequence. So definitely, it might be a possibility for a student to not have to take ALEKS. It would really depend on their major and other academic interests in that path and where it's taking them. Would you ever recommend an English major to take ALEKS exam? And the answer is, well, sure. Obviously, an English major could be doing pre-health. Let's not malign all those poor English majors out there. They could be science. They could have science interests as well. So if that's the case and the student has other interests, let's say even in other majors or minors that might have pre-calc or calc components, then yes, we would definitely encourage the student to take the ALEKS exam or require the student to take the ALEKS exam to be able to figure out where they're placing in any of those sequences that might be required for what they want to do. So math placement, can a student start in a different math class than what ALEKS places them into? This is an interesting question because it kind of depends. So if a student wants to go down a step, sure, that's fine, but make sure it's appropriate. Now, what I mean by that is that you sometimes are going to have students that are going to get really nervous and they might like get a 90% on ALEX, so really strongly test into Calc 1, and for some reason just really be very worried and panicked and go, you know what, I'm just going to take Mac 1105. I'm just going to start there. I'm just going to start at the beginning. It's probably the best thing. Now, it's up to the student. Of course, the student can go down that far on the steps. That's fine. But I don't know if that's the best use of the student's time. They're clearly showing skills in the mathematics and the calculus area. And if they want to maybe take a step back down to Mac 1147, then that might be appropriate. But I don't know if I would necessarily encourage a student. In fact, I probably would really kind of strongly discourage them from going down that far, just because that's a lot of busy work to get up to a level and also to where they actually are. And also, you know, sometimes when we're in a class that is really so repetitive to what we already know, it can just be even more difficult to be able to learn and understand the material because we're so bored or just disengaged. So it's really important to make sure that if a student is taking a step back or going backwards in their steps, if you will, that it's one that is an appropriate step backwards and not too many. And if they really are that concerned, then it's really important to have that conversation as to where that anxiety is really coming from. Now, if the student wants to go up a step, well, that depends on where that class is, right? If a student places into Mac 1147, they can't just go, you know what, I'm just going to go with Calc 1. Well, that's wonderful, but you still have to place into it. So unless they have all of a sudden other factors that are coming into play, like, oh, by the way, here's my incoming credit, or, oh, yes, I'm going to retake ALEX, which they can do. We don't recommend, but they can. Then, yes, they could obviously go up a step in those situations, assuming the prereqs are there, but it's not something that they can just declare in most situations. If they wanted to go up to Calc 2, as we've talked about, anything beyond Calc 1, so the Calc 2 and Calc 3 don't have the prerequisites, or rather that we can accept predicted scores. So if they wanted to go up, they could. But again, it really depends on the situation. For the most part, no. They would need to actually have a way or show the way in which they're meeting the prereqs to be able to take that next step forward. So if a student still has or still needs a gen ed mathematics course, does that student have to take it his or her first term? Well, no, of course not. Obviously, the student, if they're not interested in math or if they're worried about math, it's not their favorite subject, then I definitely would have them wait, because the transition to UF is difficult enough without putting a class on there that they're not very interested in. Definitely would not have them do anything in Summer B. The 6-week accelerated is not a good plan for anybody, for a course that anyone is concerned about. But even with fall, I would still recommend that they probably push it forward at least a little bit. Again, we hear that, oh, I just want to get it out of the way comment all the time. And it's one of those things where I really try to discourage students from thinking of it like that. Particularly in this situation, because again, the transition is already challenging. Some students come in and they're very focused on this idea of, well, I was in high school and I took an English, a math, a history, and a science, and that's what I'm going to do this time. And again, there's nothing wrong with that if they're really interested in all of those things, but if they're not and they're just doing it because it's kind of what they've always done, that's when we really want to help them open up to the idea of electives and pursuing different areas and having fun with the classes that they're choosing, and not just kind of defaulting into what the pattern was in high school. Getting it out of the way, never a good plan. It's like I already knew it was there. And then math placement repeating. So this is our last slide for mathematics. What would you say to a student who wants to retake Mac 2311? So it would obviously depend on the situation. Why do you want to retake it? Is it because of the pre-health prerequisites? And that's something that you want to be careful of, because we kind of just, again, default into telling students, oh, yep, you're pre-health, you have to retake it. Calculus, that's not actually the case. And we're going to go over this when we talk about pre-health, but I want to emphasize it here. For calc, a lot of times we tell students, as long as you're going to have statistics here, if you have both stats and calc through, like, let's say AP or IB or ACE, then you would probably need to take one of them at like a live or a graded institution, but you don't have to necessarily do both. It depends on the pre-health area, but for pre-med, which a lot of students are, you actually are okay with using your AP IB scores, ACE scores for Calc 1 if you then take stats here or at any other institution where you're earning a grade. So it's really important to not just go, oh, pre-help, yep, retake it, because it isn't necessarily the case. Strong foundation for sequencing, sure, makes sense. Make sure they actually need Calc 2, because that happens a lot, actually. Students will come in and go, well, I took it because I really want to make sure I have this strong foundation in it. And I always say, well, what major are you? And they'll say a major that in no way requires Calculus 2. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great, but the foundation's really important for the next step in the sequence. And if that's not there, then we definitely want to make sure that we're explaining that to the student so they're aware of why they're taking it and what it's going to do for them by retaking it at UF. And then if the student's already earned a passing grade through dual enrollment, so not necessarily with the AP, the incoming credit by exam, but they've earned the credit through dual enrollment, it may not be in the student's best interest to retake the class. It depends on the grade. Obviously, if they earn below a C and it's a required course for their major, then yes, they should probably retake it. If it's, again, a foundation issue, then maybe that's a good idea. But if they have, let's say, like a B or a C plus in a calc class, and they're pre-health and they're worried about the grade, I would definitely not encourage them to retake the class. There's no reason to go through that again. You have it, put it behind you, move forward, do well in your science courses, that's fine. But there'd be very few situations in which that would be something I would probably encourage if the foundation question or for the sequencing was off the table. It would depend on the student, of course, but just be careful that you're not just, again, encouraging things arbitrarily and not looking at the full picture of what the student needs or wants. And there endeth the calculus placement lesson. I hope you enjoyed yourselves with my really super awesome star map. I don't know, whatever, it's fine. I'm going to switch over now to chemistry, and then I'm going to go home and go to bed. So have fun, and I will talk to you in a minute.